Welcome back to Solentha Stories. Let's fuel your day with some intense passion and non-stop excitement. Grab your gear, we're moving into the story now.
At 2 a.m., my husband's female boss texted me from his phone. "He's mine now. He's occupied. Don't wait up," she wrote. I replied, "Keep him. We're done." 20 minutes later they showed up at my door, her smile proud, his face pale. But what happened next made her regret ever sending that text. At 2:30 in the morning I heard a car pull into my driveway. I had just received the cruelest text message of my life from my husband's boss, sent from his phone, telling me he belonged to her now. I had replied that she could keep him, that we were done. Now they were both standing on my front porch. Through the peephole I could see my husband Benjamin looking terrified in his rumpled suit, and beside him was Amelia Blackwood, his boss, smiling like she had just won a trophy. She was not embarrassed or apologetic. She was proud. She wanted me to see what she had taken from me. I opened the door and looked at them both, and in that moment I made a decision that would destroy her career and expose everything she had been hiding for years. She thought that text message announced her victory. She had no idea what was coming. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories of courage and accountability. If you believe that patterns of harm should be exposed and that silence protects predators, please consider subscribing. It helps us reach more people who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. But let me back up, because the night had started differently. It had started with me waking to the buzzing of my phone at exactly 2 in the morning. That particular sound means trouble before you even open your eyes. The bedroom was pitch dark except for that blue glow cutting through the shadows from my phone screen. I reached for it with hands that were already shaking, my heart accelerating with that sick certainty that something had gone catastrophically wrong. My first thought was my mother. She had been having chest pains lately, refusing to see a doctor because she insisted it was just indigestion. Or maybe Benjamin's parents, who were getting older and lived 3 states away in a house that probably needed more help than they would admit. I grabbed the phone expecting an emergency room notification or a panicked family call. Instead, I saw Benjamin's name as the sender. Benjamin, my husband of 7 years, who had left for the office at 6 yesterday evening to finish a presentation for a client meeting. Benjamin, who should have been at his desk downtown surrounded by spreadsheets and coffee cups, not sending me messages in the middle of the night. Then I noticed the line underneath his name that made my stomach drop. The actual sender displayed as Amelia Blackwood, his boss. The vice president of operations at the consulting firm where Benjamin had been working for the past 18 months, climbing the corporate ladder with an ambition that had slowly consumed every other priority in his life, including our marriage. The message itself was 12 words that felt like they had been chosen deliberately, crafted to inflict maximum damage. "He's mine now. He's occupied. Don't wait up." I read it once, then again. Then a third time, as though repetition might somehow change the meaning or reveal some alternative interpretation I had missed. But the words remained the same, stark and cruel, in that glowing rectangle I held in my trembling hands. She had used his phone to send this. She had picked up his device, scrolled to my contact, typed out this message and hit send, knowing exactly what she was doing. This was not some drunken mistake or a text sent to the wrong person. This was deliberate. This was Amelia Blackwood announcing her conquest and making absolutely certain I understood that she had taken something that belonged to me. I sat there in the darkness of our bedroom, the room we had painted together 3 years ago after debating for 2 weeks whether the color was dove gray or silver mist. The ceiling fan we had installed last summer during a heat wave rotated slowly above me, the same fan we had argued about because Benjamin thought it was unnecessary and I had insisted we needed it. The curtains we had chosen from 6 different samples spread across our dining room table now hung motionless in the still air. 7 years of marriage suddenly felt like they were collapsing inward, compressing into a single point of failure that I had been too blind or too trusting to see approaching. My mind began racing backward through our entire relationship, through every moment and every choice that had led to this particular disaster unfolding at 2 in the morning. Benjamin and I had met at an architecture conference in Seattle. I was 28, working as a residential design consultant for a firm that specialized in sustainable building practices. He was 30, presenting a paper on innovative materials in commercial construction. We had coffee after his presentation, then dinner that same evening, Then breakfast the next morning because neither of us wanted the conversation to end. He had been different then. Thoughtful in small ways that made me believe we were building something solid and real. We got married 14 months later, overlooking vineyards in Napa Valley with 75 guests and sunshine that felt like nature itself was blessing our decision. My father walked me down the aisle in his best suit, his hand steady on my arm, his eyes bright with pride. 6 months after our wedding, his heart attack took him so suddenly that I never got to say goodbye. Benjamin had held me through that grief, through the funeral arrangements and the estate paperwork and the long nights when I could not stop crying. He had whispered promises about facing everything together, about being a team no matter what challenges life threw at us. I had believed every single word. But somewhere in the past 18 months, after he had taken the position at the consulting firm where Amelia Blackwood held power and influence over promotions and career trajectories, everything had begun to shift. The changes were gradual at first, easy to dismiss as natural pressures from a demanding new job. He started working later, coming home long after I had already gone to bed. He traveled more frequently, business trips to Chicago and Boston and Atlanta that always seemed to include Amelia in the delegation. His phone became an extension of his body, something he guarded with increasing paranoia, angling the screen away from me when notifications appeared, taking calls in the other room with the door closed, setting passwords I did not know and had never needed to know before. I had told myself it was career ambition. Benjamin had always wanted recognition, had always felt he was capable of more than his previous positions had allowed. This new job was his opportunity to prove himself, to climb to the level he believed he deserved. I had supported that ambition. I had encouraged him to take the position even when it meant longer hours and more stress and significantly less time together as a couple. The signs had been there. I just had not wanted to see them. The new cologne he started wearing 3 months ago, something expensive and sophisticated that I had never helped him select. The way he angled his phone away whenever notifications appeared, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of concealment. The business trips where he would forget to call for entire evenings, then text hours later with vague excuses about client dinners running late or hotel internet being unreliable. The growing emotional distance that had transformed us from partners into polite roommates who shared space and split household expenses but no longer shared anything meaningful. My hands moved before my conscious mind fully decided what to do. I opened the message thread and positioned my thumbs over the keyboard. I could have written paragraphs. I could have poured out my hurt and confusion and sense of betrayal in a flood of words that would have given them exactly the emotional drama they were probably expecting. But something cold and analytical settled over me, that same focused clarity I used when examining architectural blueprints for structural weaknesses. I typed 7 words and added a period. Keep him. We're done. I hit send before the part of me that wanted to negotiate and compromise and somehow salvage something from this wreckage could override the decision. The message showed as delivered immediately, then read within seconds. I imagined them together somewhere, probably his office or her apartment, staring at my response and realizing I was not going to play the role of devastated wife they had anticipated. No begging. No pleading for explanations. No desperate phone calls or tearful confrontations. Just 7 words and a period because nothing communicates finality quite like proper punctuation when you are ending a marriage via text message in the middle of the night. I set the phone back on the nightstand, screen facing down, and tried to convince myself I could simply roll over and sleep, that I could close my eyes and process this disaster in the morning when I was more rested and rational. The attempt failed completely. My brain refused to cooperate, instead launching into an exhaustive inventory of every warning sign I had ignored over the past 6 months. 20 minutes passed. 20 minutes during which I lay in the darkness alternating between numbness and a cold, clarifying rage that sharpened rather than clouded my thinking. I was just beginning to wonder if maybe I had overreacted, if perhaps there was some explanation I had not considered, when I heard the unmistakable sound of a car engine in my driveway. Then car doors closing. 2 of them in quick succession. Then footsteps on the front walkway, not 1 set but 2, accompanied by voices that carried through the quiet suburban night. Benjamin's voice had that anxious pitch I recognized from when he had to present to particularly difficult clients, that edge of stress that came from knowing he was in a situation he could not easily control or talk his way out of. But underneath his voice was another one, female, carrying a tone I recognized immediately as triumph. I threw off the covers and got out of bed, my movements automatic and purposeful. I pulled on the jeans I had worn earlier, the ones draped over the chair in the corner, and grabbed the cashmere sweater Benjamin had given me for our 6th anniversary last year. Back when he still remembered such gestures mattered. Back when he still pretended to care about the small details that hold a marriage together. I made my way downstairs, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors we had refinished together 2 years ago, moving past the framed photographs from our wedding day that now felt less like celebrations of love and more like evidence of promises broken. I reached the front door, that craftsman-style entrance with custom glass panels that we had selected together during the renovation, back when we still made decisions as a team, when we still believed we were building a future that would last. That was when I looked through the peephole and saw exactly what I had described at the beginning. Benjamin looking absolutely terrified, his expensive suit rumpled in ways that clearly indicated recent physical activity, his hair disheveled, his tie loosened and askew. And beside him stood Amelia Blackwood, smiling with genuine pride, like a hunter who had bagged impressive game and wanted to display the trophy. She was not embarrassed. She was not apologetic. She was proud of what she had done and she wanted me to see it. She wanted me to understand that she had won, that she had taken my husband, that I was supposed to accept this defeat quietly and disappear from their lives without making trouble. I opened the door fully, not just a crack but all the way, and looked at them both standing on my front porch under the light I had left on before going to bed hours earlier. Benjamin started talking immediately, words tumbling out in a desperate cascade of explanations and excuses. It was not what I thought. They had been working late on a merger proposal. Things had gotten complicated. It was just one time. A terrible mistake. We could work through this together. He loved me. He had always loved me. This did not mean anything. Amelia said nothing at all. She just stood there with that smile, watching me with an assessment that made me feel like a quarterly report she was evaluating for weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Her silence was more damaging than any words could have been because it communicated clearly that she did not consider me a threat, that she believed she had already won, that Benjamin would choose her because she could offer things I could not provide: professional advancement, important social connections, the kind of ruthless ambition that matched his own. I let Benjamin finish his entire performance, watching him like I was observing a complete stranger rather than the man I had spent 7 years of my life building a partnership with. Then I looked directly at Amelia and asked a single question that would change everything that followed. How many others have there been? How many other wives have received texts like mine? Her smile faltered. Just for a second, just the briefest flicker of uncertainty, but I saw it clearly. I had spent 7 years reading people during client negotiations, learning to spot the microscopic signals that reveal when someone is hiding structural problems in their proposals or covering up information they do not want disclosed. Amelia was hiding something significant, and that momentary crack in her confident facade told me my intuition was absolutely correct. Benjamin looked confused, glancing between us, clearly not understanding what I was asking or why it mattered. But Amelia understood perfectly. She recovered quickly, sliding that corporate mask back into place with practiced efficiency, but the damage was already done. I had seen the truth underneath, and in that moment I made my decision about exactly what would happen next. "Come inside," I said, stepping back from the doorway. "Both of you. If we are going to have this conversation, we are not doing it on my front porch at 2:30 in the morning for the neighbors to witness." Benjamin moved forward immediately, relief washing over his face at the prospect that I was willing to talk rather than simply slamming the door. Amelia followed with more caution, her movements calculated like someone walking into territory she had not fully mapped or controlled. I led them through the entryway into the living room, the space Benjamin and I had designed together with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden, built-in bookshelves holding our combined library of architecture texts and novels, furniture we had selected during the early years of our marriage when we still made decisions as a unit. The contrast between them was stark in the warm lamplight of our home. Benjamin looked like he had been through a personal apocalypse, his shirt untucked, his tie hanging loose around his neck, his eyes carrying that desperate edge of a man who had just realized he had miscalculated catastrophically. Amelia, on the other hand, looked like she had stepped out of a corporate boardroom photo shoot. Her charcoal suit was perfectly pressed despite the hour, her heels clicked with authority against our hardwood floors, and her posture radiated the kind of aggressive confidence that comes from years of corporate warfare. "Benjamin," I said, keeping my voice level and professional, "the The same tone I used during difficult client meetings when emotions needed to be set aside in favor of structural analysis. Go upstairs to the guest room. I need to speak with Amelia privately. You have said your piece. Now it is her turn. He started to protest, opening his mouth to object, but something in my expression stopped him cold. Benjamin had always been uncomfortable with direct confrontation, had always preferred to smooth over problems and find diplomatic solutions rather than addressing core issues head-on. That tendency was probably exactly why Amelia had found him such an easy target in the first place. He was vulnerable in ways he did not even recognize, susceptible to manipulation by someone who understood how to exploit professional insecurity and the desperate need for validation from authority figures. He climbed the stairs slowly, his footsteps heavy on each step, looking back several times as though hoping I would relent and call him back, grant him some reprieve from whatever was about to unfold in his absence. But I did not. I waited until I heard the guest room door close, then turned my full attention to Amelia Blackwood. She had moved to the center of the living room and was standing with her arms crossed, that smile still playing at the corners of her mouth, though I noticed it had become slightly more fixed, less genuine than it had been on my front porch. She was reassessing the situation, recalculating her approach now that she was alone with me and I was not responding according to whatever script she had anticipated. You expected tears, I said, not bothering with pleasantries or preamble. You expected me to fall apart, to scream or beg or make a scene that would let you position yourself as the rational one while I played the role of hysterical wife. That is not going to happen. I do not know what you think this is, Amelia replied, her voice carrying that smooth corporate polish that comes from years of managing difficult conversations with subordinates and competitors. But Benjamin and I are both adults who made choices. What happens between consenting adults is frankly none of your concern anymore, especially since you just ended your marriage with a text message. You sent that text from his phone, I said, watching her face carefully. You picked up his device, scrolled to my contact, typed out that message telling me he belongs to you now and hit send. That was not Benjamin making a choice. That was you making a statement. So let me ask you something directly because I think we both know there is more to this story than a simple affair. I took a step closer, maintaining eye contact. How many others have there been? How many other wives have received texts like mine from their husbands' phones, messages you crafted and sent because you wanted them to know you had one? The smile disappeared completely. For just a second, maybe two, her corporate mask slipped and I saw genuine uncertainty flash across her face. It was the micro-expression I had been watching for, the tiny signal that reveals when someone is hiding structural flaws in their carefully constructed narrative. I had spent 7 years reading people during client negotiations, learning to identify the subtle tells that indicate when someone is concealing problems they desperately hope will go unnoticed. I have no idea what you are talking about, Amelia said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. You are clearly upset and not thinking rationally. Maybe you should take some time to process what has happened before you start making wild accusations. Wild accusations, I repeated, almost laughing at the audacity. Benjamin is not the first married man you have pursued in your professional circle, is he? The way you sent that text, the confidence with which you showed up at my door, the practiced nature of this entire performance. This is a pattern for you. So I am going to ask you directly, and I want you to think carefully before you answer because I already know more than you think I do. I paused, letting the silence stretch between us until it became uncomfortable. How many married men have you targeted at your company? And does your CEO know that his vice president of operations has been creating hostile work environments and potential liability issues by engaging in systematic affairs with subordinate employees? I watched the color drain from her face as she began to understand that this conversation was not about Benjamin or our marriage or some romantic rivalry between two women over a man. This was about power dynamics, corporate liability, patterns of predatory behavior that could destroy careers and expose institutional failures to protect employees from exactly this kind of misconduct. You cannot prove anything, she said, but her voice had acquired an edge that had not been there before. The smooth corporate polish was cracking, revealing something harder and more desperate underneath. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you have found, it means nothing. And if you try to make trouble for me, I have resources you cannot begin to imagine. Lawyers who will bury you in legal fees until you are bankrupt. Professional connections that will make sure you never work in this city again. Resources, I said, letting the word hang in the air between us. Yes, Let us discuss resources. I have spent the last several months watching Benjamin become increasingly distant and secretive, and unlike him, I am thorough when something troubles me. When my instincts tell me that structural integrity is compromised, I investigate before the entire system collapses. I pulled out my phone, the same device that had delivered that cruel message less than an hour ago, and opened the browser to show her what I had been looking at during those 20 minutes between sending my response and hearing their car arrive. I spent those 20 minutes after your text doing what I do best, which is research. A quick search of your name combined with terms like workplace complaints and hostile work environment yielded some fascinating results. I turned the screen toward her so she could see the search results herself. 3 different employees at your previous company filed formal complaints before you conveniently moved to your current position. The complaints were all settled quietly, buried under non-disclosure agreements that protected the company's reputation and allowed you to simply relocate rather than face any actual consequences. But the pattern is documented if you know where to look. Public records, court filings that were sealed but still leave traces, professional networks where people whisper about why certain executives suddenly change companies. Amelia had gone completely still, her face transforming into something cold and calculating as she processed this information and began recalculating her position. Those complaints were baseless, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Disgruntled employees making accusations they could not substantiate, trying to damage my reputation because I held them to high professional standards. 3 separate complaints, I continued, ignoring her weak defense. All following the same basic pattern. All involving married men in vulnerable professional positions. All resulting in destroyed marriages and damaged careers for everyone except you. You just moved on to the next company, the next opportunity, the next set of targets who had no idea what kind of pattern they were stepping into. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. Benjamin is not the first. And if I let you walk out of here tonight without consequences, he will not be the last. You have been doing this for years. Using your position and authority to manipulate people, then using corporate structures and non-disclosure agreements to silence anyone who tries to hold you accountable. What do you want? Amelia asked finally, and the question came out sharper than I think she intended. The corporate mask had fallen away entirely now, replaced by something that looked like genuine concern for the first time since she had stood on my front porch smiling about her conquest. I want you to understand that sending that text message was the worst decision you have ever made, I said quietly, because it gave me exactly the evidence I need to demonstrate that this was not some spontaneous affair or romantic entanglement. This was calculated, predatory behavior from someone with a documented history of doing exactly the same thing. And unlike the previous victims who signed non-disclosure agreements and disappeared quietly, I am not going anywhere. I am going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are. Amelia opened her mouth to respond, probably to threaten me again with lawyers and resources and professional destruction, but at that moment we both heard footsteps on the stairs. Benjamin appeared in the doorway to the living room, his face showing that he had obviously been listening to at least part of our conversation from the guest room above. The expression he wore was one I had never seen before. A mixture of horror and dawning comprehension as he began to understand that this situation was far more complicated than he had realized. "Evelyn," he said, using my name like a question or perhaps a plea. "What is she talking about? What previous complaints? I thought this was just about us, about what happened between Amelia and me." I looked at my husband, the man I had spent 7 years building a life with, and felt nothing but a distant sort of pity for how thoroughly he had been played. "You thought you were special," I said not unkindly. "You thought this was some grand romance, that you and Amelia had discovered something unique and worth risking everything for. But you were never special, Benjamin. You were just convenient. Another married man in a vulnerable professional position, desperate for validation from someone with power over your career trajectory. She identified exactly what you needed and provided it, and you never once questioned why or considered that you might be following a script she had performed many times before." Benjamin stood frozen in the doorway, his face cycling through expressions of confusion, horror, and something that looked uncomfortably close to betrayal, as though I had somehow wronged him by discovering his affair rather than him wronging me by having it. Amelia had gone rigid, her corporate composure cracking visibly as she processed what I had just revealed about her pattern of behavior across multiple companies. "I hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago," I said, directing my words at Amelia but keeping Benjamin in my peripheral vision. His name is Marcus Webb, former FBI agent who specialized in corporate misconduct investigations before he went private. When I first suspected something was wrong, I could have confronted Benjamin directly, demanded explanations, and probably received a carefully constructed series of lies. Instead, I did what I always do when I suspect structural integrity is compromised. I gathered data. I analyzed patterns. I built a comprehensive case file. Amelia's face had gone completely white, the kind of pallor that comes from genuine fear rather than simple embarrassment or discomfort. "You have been investigating me for 6 weeks?" Her voice came out higher than her usual controlled register. "That is an invasion of privacy. That is stalking. I could have you arrested for harassment." "Actually, you could not," I replied calmly. "Marcus operates within completely legal boundaries. He documents activities that occur in public spaces, reviews publicly available records, and contacts individuals who volunteer to share their experiences. Nothing he has done constitutes harassment or invasion of privacy. But you already know that, don't you? Because you have probably dealt with private investigators before, back when those complaints were being filed at your previous company." I pulled out my phone, the device that had started this entire confrontation with its cruel message at 2 a.m, and opened the secure folder where Marcus had been sending his reports over the past several weeks. 6 weeks ago, I was sitting at our kitchen table trying to reconcile our credit card statement. Benjamin had always been somewhat careless with receipts and documentation, so I usually handled our monthly finances. That particular evening, I noticed charges that did not align with the stories he had been telling me about his business activities. I scrolled through the folder, past the photographs and time-stamped reports, finding the specific charges I had first questioned. Dinner at Marcello's, that upscale Italian restaurant downtown, on a Tuesday evening when Benjamin told me he was working late at the office with a team presentation. A hotel charge in Chicago for a suite rather than a standard room, during a trip he had described as a solo obligation for a client pitch. Charges from boutique wine bars and restaurants I had never heard of, all occurring on evenings when he claimed to be trapped in tedious meetings or buried under deadline pressures. Benjamin made a sound somewhere between a groan and a protest, but I continued without acknowledging him. I could have confronted him with these discrepancies. But architects learn early in their training that when you suspect foundation problems, you don't just look at surface cracks. You investigate the underlying structure. So I researched private investigators in our area who specialized in corporate and personal misconduct cases. Marcus Webb's name appeared on several professional recommendation lists, with particular emphasis on his discretion and thoroughness. I turned the phone screen toward Amelia, showing her the first photograph in Marcus's collection. It had been taken 4 weeks ago outside Marcello's, showing Benjamin and Amelia leaving the restaurant together, his hand resting intimately on the small of her back, her face turned toward him with an expression that communicated far more than professional collegiality. The timestamp read 8:47 in the evening. The geolocation data was embedded in the file metadata. "Marcus documented everything," I said quietly. "Every dinner, every business trip that wasn't actually business. Every evening when Benjamin told me he would be working late but instead went to your apartment building and didn't leave until the early morning hours. All photographed, all time-stamped, all geotagged with precision that would hold up in any divorce proceeding or corporate investigation." I scrolled through the folder showing image after image. Benjamin and Amelia at an outdoor cafe, sharing dessert with the kind of easy intimacy that comes from established relationships rather than new attractions. Benjamin and Amelia entering a hotel in Chicago, the same trip where he had told me he was staying at a budget conference center provided by the client. Benjamin and Amelia in the parking garage of her apartment building at 9 in the evening, caught in a moment where his hand cupped her face and her eyes were closed in obvious anticipation of a kiss. But photographs only tell part of the story, I continued, closing the image folder and opening a different file containing text documents and recorded statements. Marcus is exceptionally thorough. Once he had established the pattern of your relationship with Benjamin, he started investigating your professional history. That's when things became truly interesting. Amelia had recovered some of her composure, though her face remained pale and her hands had clenched into fists at her sides. "Whatever you think you have found in my professional history is protected by confidentiality agreements and settlement terms. Those records are sealed. You have no legal right to access them. Sealed records still leave traces, I replied. Court filings that show cases were initiated even if the details are protected. Professional networks where people whisper about why certain executives suddenly relocate. Former colleagues who are willing to share general information about workplace culture and patterns of behavior, even if they can't discuss specific settlement terms. Marcus spent 3 weeks tracking down women from your previous company who had filed those workplace complaints I mentioned earlier. I watched Amelia's expression shift from defensive anger to something approaching genuine panic. He contacted them carefully and respectfully, explained that there might be another victim following the same pattern they had experienced, asked if they would be willing to share their stories. 3 of them agreed to talk. They provided detailed statements about their experiences, about the pattern of how you operate. Benjamin finally found his voice, though it came out weak and uncertain. Evelyn, what are you talking about? What women? What pattern? I thought this was about us, about a mistake I made, not some conspiracy theory involving Amelia's past. I turned to look at my husband directly for the first time since he had appeared in the doorway. The pattern is remarkably consistent, Benjamin. Amelia identifies married men in vulnerable professional positions, men who are ambitious but insecure about their career trajectory, men who desperately want validation from authority figures. She provides that validation through professional mentorship that gradually becomes personal attention. She uses her position and access to create situations where intimacy develops, always carefully, always with plausible deniability. Then when the relationship runs its course or threatens to become publicly problematic, she moves on. The marriages collapse. The men's careers often suffer. But Amelia simply relocates to a new company with a glowing recommendation and starts the pattern again with a fresh set of targets. I pulled up one of the written statements Marcus had collected, this one from a woman named Jennifer who had filed a complaint 5 years ago at Amelia's previous company. This woman's husband worked under Amelia's supervision in the marketing division. Amelia pursued him over the course of 8 months, using the same techniques she used with you. Late-night work sessions. Business trips where they happened to be staying at the same hotel. Professional praise and career advancement opportunities tied to personal loyalty. When the wife discovered the affair and the husband tried to end things, Amelia made his work life miserable until he eventually resigned. The marriage ended in divorce. The husband's career never recovered. And Amelia received a promotion 3 months later before quietly moving to a new company when the wife threatened to make the situation public. Benjamin had gone very still, his face showing the dawning realization that he had not been special or unique, that he had been following a script written and performed multiple times before. Amelia, however, had shifted tactics. The fear had been replaced by cold calculation. Even if any of that were true, she said, her voice regaining some of its earlier authority, you cannot prove I did anything illegal. Workplace affairs happen. People make poor personal choices. That does not constitute a pattern of predatory behavior or corporate misconduct. And if you try to make this public, I have lawyers who will destroy you. I have resources you cannot begin to imagine. I will bury you in litigation until you have nothing left. Resources, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air between us. You keep mentioning your resources as though they provide immunity from consequences. But here is what you seem to be missing, Amelia. I am not interested in litigation or legal battles. I am not trying to build a criminal case against you. What I am offering you is a choice. I set my phone down on the coffee table between us, the screen still showing Jennifer's statement with its careful documentation of exactly how Amelia had destroyed her marriage and her husband's career. You have 2 options. The first is that you resign from your position immediately. Tomorrow morning, you submit your resignation to your CEO, citing personal reasons or family obligations or whatever explanation allows you to exit gracefully. You leave this city, you leave this industry, and you disappear quietly before this pattern becomes public knowledge. Amelia started to speak, but I held up one hand to stop her. The second option is that Marcus releases everything he has compiled to your CEO, to your board of directors, and to several journalists who specialize in corporate misconduct stories. The photographs documenting your affair with a subordinate employee. The statements from women at your previous company describing identical patterns of behavior. The evidence that you have been doing this for years, using your position to manipulate vulnerable employees, then using corporate structures and settlement agreements to silence anyone who tries to hold you accountable. I picked up my phone again and met her eyes directly. Those non-disclosure agreements you keep relying on? Marcus confirmed with his legal contacts that they become void when there is a pattern of predatory behavior that represents an ongoing threat to others. The women from your previous company are willing to break their silence if it means preventing you from hurting more people. The consulting industry is remarkably small, Amelia. Reputations matter. And yours is about to become very interesting to discuss at professional conferences and networking events. The silence that followed felt heavy and charged. Amelia stood perfectly still, her mind obviously racing through calculations and scenarios, trying to find some angle or leverage she could use to regain control of the situation. Benjamin looked like he wanted to sink through the floor and disappear entirely. You have 24 hours to decide, I said finally. After that, Marcus sends his complete file to everyone who needs to see it. Your choice. Amelia stared at me for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then, without saying another word, she turned and walked toward my front door. Her designer heels clicked against the hardwood floors with sharp, decisive strikes that echoed through the quiet house. She did not look back. She did not offer threats or protests. She simply left, pulling the door closed behind her with a controlled precision that somehow felt like the most honest thing she had done all evening. The sound of her car starting and pulling out of my driveway felt like punctuation on the end of a very long sentence. Benjamin remained standing in the living room after Amelia's departure, looking like a man who had just watched his entire understanding of reality collapse around him. The silence between us stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable, filled with all the words we had not said to each other over the past 18 months and all the conversations we would never have now. Evelyn, he finally said, my name coming out like a question or perhaps a plea for some kind of absolution I had no intention of providing. I did not know. I swear to you, I did not know she had done this before. She told me we had something special, that what we had was different from anything she had experienced before. She made me believe that this was real, that we had a genuine connection. I almost laughed at the absurdity of his defense, at the way he was still trying to frame this as some kind of romantic tragedy rather than the calculated manipulation it had actually been. Of course she told you that, Benjamin. That is exactly how this works. She identified what you needed, what vulnerabilities she could exploit, and she provided exactly that validation. Professional affirmation from someone with power over your career. Personal attention from someone who made you feel important and special and valued in ways you apparently were not getting from your wife. He flinched at my tone, but I was not finished. You were not special. You were not unique. You were convenient. You were a married man in a vulnerable professional position, ambitious but insecure, desperate for recognition from authority figures. She has been doing this for years, targeting men exactly like you, running the same playbook over and over because it works. And you never once questioned why a vice president would be interested in you specifically, why she would risk her position for some grand romance, whether her attention might have motivations that had nothing to do with your inherent specialness. Benjamin sank down onto the couch, his head in his hands. What am I supposed to do now? My career is going to be destroyed when this comes out. Everyone at the firm will know. My colleagues will think I slept my way into my current position. My professional reputation will be ruined. Your professional reputation, I repeated, and I could hear the edge in my own voice growing sharper. That is your primary concern right now? Not the marriage you destroyed, not the trust you violated, but your professional reputation? You made choices, Benjamin. You chose to have an affair with your boss. You chose to lie to me for months. You chose to allow her to use your phone to send me that cruel message. Now you get to live with the consequences of those choices. I walked to the window overlooking our garden, the space we had planted together 3 springs ago when we still believed we were building something that would last. You can stay in the guest room tonight because it is nearly 4 in the morning and I am too exhausted to deal with you leaving right now. But I want you out of this house by the end of the week. I will be filing for divorce tomorrow. My lawyer will contact you about asset division and the process for separating our finances. This marriage is over. 7 years, he said, and his voice cracked with what might have been genuine emotion or might have been self-pity. I honestly could not tell anymore. 7 years of marriage and you are just ending it like this? I do not even get a chance to fight for us. To prove that I can change, that I can be better. I turned to look at him, really look at him, and felt nothing but a distant sort of pity for the man I had once loved enough to marry. You ended it when you made the choice to betray me, Benjamin. I am simply acknowledging reality. And honestly, the fact that you think you deserve a chance to fight for us after everything you have done just demonstrates how fundamentally you still do not understand what you have destroyed. He opened his mouth to argue further, but I held up one hand to stop him. Go upstairs. Get some sleep if you can. We will deal with logistics in the morning when we are both more rational. But this conversation is over. He climbed the stairs slowly, defeated, and I heard the guest room door close with a soft click that felt like punctuation on the end of our marriage. I did not sleep. I sat in the living room as the sky gradually lightened outside the windows, watching the sun come up over the garden, processing everything that had happened in the past few hours. At 7 in the morning, I made coffee and called my younger sister Catherine. I needed to tell someone what had happened, needed some kind of support or solidarity or at least a sympathetic ear to process this disaster with. Evelyn, what is wrong? Catherine answered immediately, her voice thick with sleep. Why are you calling so early? Benjamin had an affair with his boss, I said without preamble, too tired for gentle lead-ins or careful explanations. I found out last night. Actually, she sent me a text message from his phone at 2 in the morning telling me he belonged to her now. I told her she could keep him. I am filing for divorce today. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Catherine said something I absolutely had not expected. Evelyn, are you sure you are not overreacting? I mean, you said it might have been just one time, right? Marriages work. People make mistakes. Do you really want to throw away 7 years over one affair? Maybe you should consider counseling, give Benjamin a chance to explain and apologize properly. Her words felt like a physical blow, like someone had reached through the phone and slapped me. Are you seriously suggesting I should stay married to someone who had an affair with his boss and let her send me cruel text messages in the middle of the night? I am just saying that divorce is such a permanent solution, Catherine replied, and her voice had that careful tone people use when they think you are being unreasonable or overly emotional. You have built a life together. You have a house, shared finances, 7 years of history. That has to count for something. Maybe this was a moment of weakness, a mistake he deeply regrets. People can change if you give them the opportunity. I felt something cold settle in my chest as I listened to my sister, the person I had expected to support me unconditionally, instead suggesting I should forgive and forget. Catherine, you got divorced 3 years ago when your husband cheated with a coworker. You told me then that you wished you had left sooner, that you had wasted years trying to fix something that was fundamentally broken. Why are you now suggesting I do exactly what you said you regretted? Another long pause. Then Catherine said something that cut far deeper than anything Benjamin had said all night. Because you always do everything perfectly, Evelyn. Perfect career, perfect house, perfect marriage. You are the successful sister, the one who has it all figured out. And I am the one who got divorced, who struggled, who had to rebuild from nothing. If your marriage falls apart too, then what does that say about me? That I gave up too easily? That I should have tried harder? Her honesty was brutal and completely unexpected. My sister, who I had thought was my closest ally, was actually resentful of my life, or at least the version of my life she had constructed in her mind. She wanted me to stay married not because it was best for me, but because my success somehow validated her own failure. My happy marriage made her divorce seem like the right choice. If my marriage failed too, then maybe her divorce had been premature. Catherine, I need some space, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady despite the hurt spreading through my chest. I will call you when I am ready to talk again. But right now, I cannot deal with your projection of your own regrets onto my situation. I hung up before she could respond, before she could apologize or try to explain further or make this any more painful than it already was. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the morning light streaming through windows I had chosen, in a house I had helped design, and felt more alone than I had felt even at 2 in the morning when that text message had first arrived. Betrayal from your husband is one kind of pain. Betrayal from your sister, from someone you expected to stand beside you unconditionally, cuts differently. It hits deeper because you do not expect it, because you had not built defenses against that particular wound. My phone rang again around 2 in the afternoon, a number I did not recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, too emotionally exhausted to deal with unknown callers, but something made me answer. Is this Evelyn Hartley? A woman's voice asked. My name is Claire Patterson. Marcus Webb gave me your number. I hope it is okay that I am calling. Claire, I said, placing the name immediately. You were one of the women from Amelia's previous company. One of the ones who filed a complaint. Yes, she confirmed, and I could hear something in her voice that sounded like relief mixed with nervousness. Marcus contacted me last week, explained that there might be another victim, asked if I would be willing to provide a statement about my experience. I wanted to call you directly because I needed to tell you something important. She took a breath, and when she continued, her voice was stronger. What you are doing, not staying silent, not signing some non-disclosure agreement and disappearing quietly, that takes real courage. I did not have that courage 3 years ago. When Amelia destroyed my marriage, when my husband lost his job because of the situation she created, the company offered me a settlement. Money to go away, a confidentiality agreement to ensure I would never talk about what happened. And I took it. Her voice cracked slightly, and I heard her trying to compose herself. I took the money because I was scared and ashamed, and I just wanted the whole nightmare to be over. I wanted to pretend it had never happened, to move on with my life and never think about Amelia Blackwood again. But it was never really over. I carried that shame for years. I watched from a distance as she moved to a new company, probably found new targets, probably destroyed more marriages. And I knew I could have stopped her if I had been brave enough to speak up. But I was not. I felt something shift inside me as I listened to Claire's confession, understanding dawning that this situation was bigger than just my personal disaster. You are speaking up now, I said quietly. That counts for something. You are stopping her from hurting someone else, Claire replied, and there was gratitude in her voice that I had not expected. You are doing what I should have done. You are making sure the pattern ends. Thank you for that. Thank you for having the courage I did not have. After we hung up, I sat with my phone in my hand, staring at nothing, processing this new understanding. This was not just about my marriage anymore. This was not just about Benjamin's betrayal or Amelia's cruelty. This was about a pattern that had continued for years because people stayed silent, because victims took settlements and signed agreements and disappeared rather than fighting back. And I had the power to end it. The days that followed blurred together in a strange combination of mundane routine and emotional upheaval. I went to work, met with clients, reviewed architectural plans, and somehow managed to maintain a professional facade while my personal life disintegrated in slow motion. Benjamin remained in the guest room despite my clear directive that he needed to leave, launching what I can only describe as a desperate campaign to salvage something from the wreckage he had created. Monday morning, I found a handwritten note on the kitchen counter beside the coffee maker. His handwriting was rushed and uneven, the words barely legible. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. 7 years has to count for something. Please give me a chance to prove I can be better. I love you. I read it once, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it in the trash without response. Tuesday evening, I came home from a client meeting to find Benjamin in the kitchen attempting to cook dinner. The smoke alarm was shrieking, filling the house with the acrid smell of burning meat. He had apparently tried to make the grilled chicken dish he used to prepare during the early years of our marriage, back when he still made efforts to contribute to our domestic life. Instead, he had charred it beyond recognition, leaving the kitchen filled with smoke and the pan crusted with blackened residue. He stood there looking helpless and apologetic, holding a spatula like it was a foreign object he did not quite know how to operate. I was trying to do something nice, he said over the wailing alarm, his voice carrying that pleading tone I was learning to recognize as his default setting these days. I thought maybe if I cooked your favorite meal we could sit down and talk properly like we used to. I walked past him without responding, opened the windows to clear the smoke and disabled the alarm. Then I ordered takeout from the Thai restaurant down the street and ate alone in the dining room while he retreated back upstairs to the guest room. Wednesday brought flowers to my office. A massive arrangement of white roses and lilies, the kind of expensive display that probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget. My assistant brought them in with a card attached, her expression curious and concerned as she set them on my desk. The card read, 7 years should count for something. I'm not giving up on us. I left the flowers on my desk through the end of the workday, then asked my assistant if she wanted to take them home. She accepted gratefully, not asking the questions I could see forming in her eyes. I did not want those flowers in my house, did not want the visual reminder of Benjamin's attempts to purchase forgiveness through gestures that required no real accountability or change. Thursday evening, he cornered me in the hallway as I was heading upstairs to my bedroom. He looked terrible, his hair unwashed, his clothes wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he was sleeping about as well as I was. "Evelyn, please," he said, positioning himself so I would have to push past him to continue walking. "I need you to understand something. Amelia manipulated me. I see that now. Everything you said about her pattern, about how she targets vulnerable people, it's true. I was weak and stupid and I let myself get played. But that doesn't change the fact that I love you. I've always loved you. Please give me another chance to prove that I can be the husband you deserve." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. That was the strangest and most unsettling part of the entire week. Not anger anymore, not even hurt or betrayal. Just a complete absence of feeling, like I was observing a stranger who happened to be temporarily occupying space in my home. The man I had married, the person I had built a life with, felt like someone I barely recognized. "Benjamin, you do not get to blame Amelia for your choices," I said, keeping my voice flat and unemotional. "You are a grown adult. You made decisions. You chose to have an affair. You chose to lie to me for months. You chose to let her use your phone to send me that message. Those were your choices, not hers. And now you get to live with the consequences of those choices. I want you out of this house by Saturday. Pack your things and leave, or I will pack them for you and leave them on the front lawn." I pushed past him and went into my bedroom, locking the door behind me. Friday afternoon, I needed some financial documents for the divorce filing my lawyer was preparing. Benjamin's home office was the logical place to find them, so I went in during my lunch break while he was supposedly at work. His laptop sat open on the desk, the screen still active because he had apparently walked away without locking it. I should not have looked. I knew I should not have looked. But the email application was open and visible, and my eyes caught on a message in his sent folder from just 2 days earlier. The recipient was Amelia. The subject line read, "We need to talk." I clicked on the message despite knowing it would only make me angrier, despite knowing I was invading his privacy in a way that probably was not legally advisable during divorce proceedings. But I needed to know. I needed to understand whether he was still in contact with her, whether his apologies to me were genuine or just another performance. The message read, "Evelyn knows everything. She has evidence from a private investigator. Photographs, statements from women at your previous company, documentation of the pattern. You need to be careful. She is not going to let this go quietly. She is planning to expose everything if you don't resign. I'm sorry I couldn't warn you sooner. I didn't know she was investigating until it was too late." I stared at that message for a long moment, feeling something cold and final settle into place. He was warning her. Even after everything, even after I had caught them, even after she had sent that cruel text announcing her conquest, Benjamin was still protecting Amelia. Still putting her interests and her career ahead of any loyalty he supposedly had to me. His apologies meant nothing. His declarations of love were empty words. He was not sorry for what he had done. He was only sorry he had been caught. I took a screenshot of the message and sent it to Marcus with a brief note explaining what I had found. Then I took another screenshot and sent it to my lawyer with additional context. For the divorce file. Shows ongoing communication and loyalty to affair partner over spouse. Demonstrates lack of genuine remorse. I closed the laptop, left his office and went back to work. That evening I sent Benjamin a text message. "I found the email you sent to Amelia. You have until Saturday morning to be completely moved out. After that I'm changing the locks." My mother called that same evening, her timing somehow perfectly coinciding with the moment I needed to hear from her most. She is 72 years old, widowed for 6 years since my father's death, and possesses a remarkable ability to cut through emotional noise and see situations with brutal clarity. "Catherine told me what happened with you and Benjamin," she said without any preliminary small talk or gentle lead-in. "And she told me what she said to you on the phone about whether you were overreacting. I want you to know that she was wrong. Completely wrong." My mother has never been one for lengthy emotional speeches or dramatic declarations, so I stayed quiet and let her talk. "Your father cheated on me once," she said, her voice steady and matter-of-fact. "You were about 5 years old at the time. I found out because the woman he was involved with called our house and told me everything. She was angry that he had ended things with her, so she decided to make sure I knew what had been happening. Your father begged me to stay. He cried, made promises about changing, said it had been a terrible mistake that meant nothing. And I stayed." She paused and I could hear her taking a breath before continuing. I stayed because that is what women did in my generation. You did not just walk away from a marriage because your husband made a mistake. I was scared of being alone, scared of what people would say, scared of trying to raise 2 young daughters on a secretary's salary. Everyone told me that marriage was work, that I needed to try harder, that forgiveness was noble and divorce was failure. But he never really changed, she continued, her voice carrying a weight I had never heard before. He was more careful after that, more secretive with his activities and his phone calls. But the fundamental respect was gone. Once someone shows you that they value you so little that they can betray your trust, you cannot unsee that knowledge. Changes everything. I stayed for 30 more years until his heart attack took him, and I do not regret the life we built or the family we raised together. But I do regret not having the courage you are showing right now. I regret accepting less than I deserved because I was too afraid to demand better. After we hung up, I sat with my phone in my hand, processing her confession. My parents' marriage, which I had always viewed as reasonably solid if not particularly passionate, had been built on a foundation of betrayal and compromise. My mother had spent 3 decades with a man who had violated her trust, staying because leaving seemed harder than enduring. And she was telling me not to make the same mistake. Saturday morning arrived and Benjamin finally moved out. He left without drama or final speeches, just loaded his belongings into his car and drove away to the corporate apartment his company had arranged. I watched from the living room window as he made multiple trips, carrying boxes and suitcases, his movements heavy with defeat. After he left, I walked through the empty house. The space we had renovated together, where we had planned to eventually raise children, where we had built what I had believed was a genuine partnership. Every room held memories that now felt corrupted, tainted by the knowledge that our foundation had been rotting while I was too trusting or too blind to notice. I went into the kitchen and opened the cabinet where we kept the wine glasses. The expensive crystal ones we had received as wedding gifts from Benjamin's aunt, each one delicate and beautiful and representing celebration and optimism about our future together. I took out 2 glasses, the specific pair we had used to toast each other on our wedding night, and I threw them against the tile floor as hard as I could. They shattered into thousands of pieces, glittering fragments scattering across the kitchen, and the sound was both satisfying and terrible. I threw 4 more glasses, then 6 more. I kept throwing until all 12 crystal glasses were destroyed and the floor was covered in shards that caught the afternoon light like broken promises made visible. Then I sat down on the floor in the middle of all that broken glass and cried for the first time since the text message had arrived nearly a week earlier. Not for Benjamin or for the marriage we had lost, but for the version of myself who had believed in permanence and partnership, who had trusted that vows meant something, who had built her entire adult life around a future that had turned out to be nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. I eventually swept up the broken crystal from the kitchen floor, each shard catching the light as I collected them into a trash bag that felt heavier than it should have. The physical act of cleaning up the mess I had created felt symbolic somehow, though I was too exhausted to fully process what that symbolism might mean. I was still sitting at the kitchen table an hour later, staring at nothing in particular, when my phone chimed with a new email notification. The sender address was unfamiliar, a generic combination of letters and numbers that suggested a temporary account created specifically for this communication. The subject line contained just 2 words, "You won." I opened the message with a sense of cold anticipation, knowing before I read it who had sent it and what it would contain. The text was brief and carefully composed, each word chosen to convey maximum impact while maintaining plausible deniability about the actual circumstances surrounding her departure. I have submitted my resignation effective immediately. Cited family health issues requiring relocation. You will not hear from me again. But know this. You have destroyed my career over a personal matter that was none of your business. You could have handled this privately, woman to woman, with some degree of dignity and discretion. Instead, you chose vindictiveness and public humiliation. I hope that destroying another woman's professional reputation makes you feel better about your failed marriage. I hope you are satisfied with what you have done. I read the message twice, then a third time, analyzing the language choices and recognizing them for what they were. A final attempt to control the narrative, to reposition herself as the victim of my unreasonable response rather than the architect of her own professional destruction. She was trying to reframe accountability as vindictiveness, consequences as persecution, documentation as personal vendetta. I forwarded the email to Marcus with a brief note. Save this for the file. Shows consciousness of guilt and deliberate attempt to rewrite the situation. Note the language about handling things privately, which essentially means she wanted me to stay silent while she continued the pattern. Then I forwarded it to my lawyer with additional context about why this communication mattered in terms of demonstrating Amelia's understanding that her behavior had been inappropriate even as she tried to blame me for exposing it. After that, I deleted the original message from my inbox. I had no interest in preserving her words or allowing her one final manipulation to occupy space in my digital life. She had made calculated choices for years, targeting vulnerable people and using corporate structures to silence anyone who tried to hold her accountable. Now she was experiencing calculated consequences, and her attempt to frame those consequences as my personal failing rather than her professional misconduct only confirmed that she had learned nothing from this experience. 3 days passed with no further communication from Amelia. I assumed she had indeed relocated, disappeared into whatever next opportunity she believed she could secure despite the growing whispers about her departure. But on Thursday afternoon, Marcus called with information that shifted my understanding of the situation entirely. 2 more women have come forward, he said without preamble, his voice carrying that particular tone he used when delivering significant developments. Both from Amelia's current company, both with stories that follow the exact same pattern we documented with the women from her previous employment. I set down the architectural plans I had been reviewing and gave him my full attention. What prompted them to contact you now? They saw the resignation announcement, Marcus explained. The company sent out an internal memo about Amelia's departure, citing family health issues requiring immediate relocation. But these women knew that explanation was not accurate. They had been watching the situation, hoping someone would finally hold her accountable, and when they saw she was leaving suddenly they wanted to make sure their experiences were documented before she could disappear and potentially start this pattern again somewhere new. He gave me the basic details. One woman, Jessica, was a junior consultant whose marriage had ended after her husband's affair with Amelia came to light. The other, Sarah, was still married but the relationship was severely damaged, held together only through intensive counseling and her husband's genuine remorse combined with Sarah's willingness to try rebuilding trust after Amelia had pursued him during a company retreat last year. Both women are willing to provide formal statements, Marcus continued. Both want Amelia's pattern documented in official records that cannot be sealed or hidden behind corporate settlements. They understand that speaking up might have professional consequences for them, but they are willing to accept that risk if it means preventing future victims. Do you want me to coordinate collecting their testimonies and adding them to the case file? Yes, I said without hesitation. Document everything. Make sure their statements are preserved in multiple formats and locations. If Amelia tries to resurface in this industry, there needs to be a clear paper trail that any competent hiring manager can find if they bother to look. After hanging up with Marcus, I sat with this new information, understanding that what had started as my personal response to a cruel text message had evolved into something significantly larger. These women were trusting me with their stories, believing that my willingness to refuse silence would create space for them to speak as well. That responsibility felt heavy and meaningful in ways I had not fully anticipated when I first gave Amelia her ultimatum. 2 weeks after that conversation with Marcus, my phone rang with my sister Catherine's name on the display. I had not spoken to her since our difficult conversation when she had suggested I was overreacting to Benjamin's affair, when she had revealed her resentment about my supposedly perfect life. I considered letting the call go to voicemail, but something made me answer. I was wrong, Catherine said immediately, her words coming out in a rush before I could even say hello. I have been thinking about what I said to you and I was so completely wrong, Evelyn. I was projecting my own regrets and insecurities onto your situation. I was making your pain about my feelings instead of supporting you the way a sister should. I am so sorry. Her voice sounded raw and genuine, lacking the defensive edge it had carried during our previous conversation. The truth is that I have been jealous of you for years. You have always been the successful one, the sister who seemed to have everything figured out. Perfect career, beautiful house, stable marriage. And I was the one who got divorced, who struggled financially, who had to rebuild my entire life from nothing. When your marriage fell apart, some terrible part of me actually felt relieved that you were not perfect either, that you were finally experiencing the kind of failure I had been living with. She paused and I could hear her taking a shaky breath. But that is not your burden to carry. That is my issue to work through with my therapist. You did not deserve what Benjamin did to you, and you definitely did not deserve me making you feel bad for refusing to tolerate his betrayal. I am genuinely sorry. We talked for over an hour after that, really talked in a way we had not managed in years. Catherine told me about the therapy sessions she had started attending, about working through her resentment and shame about her divorce, about recognizing how she had been comparing her internal struggles to my external appearance of success without understanding that everyone carries hidden difficulties. I told her about the broken wine glasses and crying on the kitchen floor, about the moment I had finally allowed myself to grieve not just for the marriage but for the version of myself who had believed in permanence and promises. We both cried during that conversation. Then we both laughed about how ridiculous we must sound, two grown women sobbing over the phone about feelings we should have discussed years ago. By the end of the call, something felt repaired between us, some crack that had been widening for longer than either of us wanted to acknowledge. Catherine was still my sister, still someone I loved despite her momentary lapse in judgment, and rebuilding that relationship felt like reclaiming something valuable from the wreckage of everything else that had fallen apart. 3 weeks after Amelia's resignation, Marcus called again with a different kind of update. The industry is talking, he said. Quietly but consistently. Recruiters are asking questions about why she left so suddenly. Her name is circulating in professional networks with questions attached about whether the family health explanation was legitimate. People are starting to notice the pattern of her moving between companies every few years, always under circumstances that involve sudden departures. The consulting world, as I was learning, operated largely on reputation and professional connections. Information traveled through informal networks, whispered conversations at industry conferences, careful questions asked during reference checks. Amelia's carefully constructed professional image was beginning to crack as more people started questioning the official narrative. Then I received a call from a journalist named David Morrison who specialized in corporate misconduct and workplace accountability issues. I have been hearing some interesting stories about Amelia Blackwood, he said carefully, his tone professional but clearly interested. Multiple sources have mentioned your name in connection with evidence about patterns of inappropriate behavior spanning several years. I am working on a piece about power dynamics in professional settings and how corporate structures sometimes protect predatory behavior. Would you be willing to discuss what you know? I told him I would need to think about it, that I was not ready to make this fully public yet. But after hanging up, I sat with the realization that my private response to Amelia's cruelty was becoming something larger. Something that might actually create meaningful change beyond just holding one person accountable for her actions. I spent 3 days thinking about David Morrison's request before finally calling him back. During those 3 days, I wrestled with questions about privacy, about whether making the situation public served any purpose beyond my own need for vindication, about whether I had the right to expose other people's stories even if they had given me permission to do so. But ultimately, I kept returning to the same fundamental truth. My silence protected Amelia's ability to hurt other people. Every day I refused to speak was another day she could potentially rebuild her career in a new location with a new set of targets who had no idea about her history. I will talk, I told David when I finally called him back. But I need you to understand that this is not about revenge. This is about creating a documented record that prevents this pattern from continuing unchecked. Marcus arranged the meeting at a neutral location. A coffee shop in the downtown business district that was busy enough to provide ambient noise but quiet enough for conversation. David arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather messenger bag and wearing the kind of professional attire that suggested he took his work seriously. He set up a small recording device on the table between us after asking my permission, pulled out a notepad and pen, and settled into his chair with the patient, attentive demeanor of someone who had conducted hundreds of interviews and understood how to make people feel safe sharing difficult stories. I told him everything, starting with the text message that had arrived at 2 in the morning and working through the entire sequence of events that had followed. The confrontation at my door with both Benjamin and Amelia. The research I had conducted in those 20 minutes after sending my response, discovering the complaints filed at her previous company. The decision to hire Marcus and document the pattern systematically rather than simply confronting Benjamin directly. The discovery that multiple women had experienced identical targeting and manipulation, all following the same basic script. I gave David names, dates, documentation that Marcus had collected. I showed him the photographs of Benjamin and Amelia together, the time-stamped evidence of their relationship, the statements from women at her previous company describing how she had destroyed their marriages and damaged their husbands' careers before moving on to the next opportunity. I explained about the non-disclosure agreements that had buried previous complaints, about how corporate structures had consistently prioritized reputation management over accountability, about how Amelia had been able to continue this pattern for years because her victims stayed silent. "This matters beyond my personal situation," I said, leaning forward to emphasize the point I most needed him to understand. "This is about power dynamics in professional settings. About people in positions of authority using that power to manipulate subordinates, then using corporate resources and legal intimidation to silence anyone who tries to hold them accountable. The consulting industry talks constantly about professional ethics and workplace culture, but when someone with Amelia's track record and connections engages in predatory behavior, the system protects her rather than her victims. That needs to change." David took notes throughout our conversation, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting additional details about specific incidents. He interviewed me for nearly 3 hours, and by the end I felt emotionally exhausted but also oddly relieved, as though I had been carrying something heavy and had finally been able to set it down. The article published on a Friday morning 2 weeks later. David had titled it "The Pattern of Power: How One Executive's Personal Conduct Reveals Larger Industry Problems." I read it before it went live, having been given the opportunity to review the sections that directly quoted me or referenced my experience. The piece was thorough, well-researched, and absolutely devastating in its documentation of Amelia's behavior across multiple years and multiple companies. David had interviewed 5 women total, including me. He had documented the pattern spanning 7 years, 2 companies, and at least 8 identifiable victims. He had raised pointed questions about why corporate structures consistently protected people like Amelia while silencing the individuals she had harmed, about how non-disclosure agreements and confidential settlements created environments where predatory behavior could continue unchecked, about what accountability actually looked like in professional settings versus what it claimed to look like in corporate mission statements. My phone started ringing within an hour of the article's publication. Colleagues calling to express support or ask careful questions about what had happened. Marcus checking in to see how I was handling the sudden public exposure. Claire and Jessica and Sarah, the other women who had contributed to the article, reaching out to share their own experiences of watching the piece go live and fielding responses from their professional networks. Benjamin called 6 times in rapid succession before I finally answered, mostly because I wanted to stop the incessant buzzing of my phone. "How could you do this?" he demanded immediately, his voice carrying that combination of anger and panic that comes from someone whose carefully managed professional image has just been shattered. "How could you make this public? This is humiliating. Everyone at my firm is talking about it. My colleagues are asking me questions about my relationship with Amelia. My boss called me into his office this morning to discuss whether I am going to be a liability to the company's reputation. You have destroyed my professional credibility along with hers." His complete inability to understand the actual issue at hand was staggering. He was concerned about his reputation, about how this made him look, about the professional consequences he was experiencing. He showed no awareness of the larger pattern the article had documented, no recognition that multiple women had been hurt by Amelia's systematic targeting of vulnerable married men, no comprehension that his individual situation was part of a much bigger problem about power and accountability in professional environments. "Benjamin," I said, keeping my voice cold and measured, "you destroyed your own reputation when you chose to have an affair with your boss. You destroyed your professional credibility when you allowed yourself to be manipulated because you were desperate for validation from someone with authority over your career trajectory. I simply stopped protecting you from the consequences of your choices. I stopped covering for you, stopped making excuses for your behavior, stopped allowing you to hide behind the privacy of our failed marriage. Do not call me again unless it is about the divorce paperwork. We have nothing else to discuss." I hung up before he could respond and immediately blocked his number. I was done fielding his attempts to reframe accountability as persecution, consequences as unfair punishment, exposure as vindictive cruelty. 3 days after the article published, Amelia's former company issued an official statement. We take these allegations seriously and are conducting a thorough internal review of our workplace policies and complaint procedures. The safety and well-being of our employees is our highest priority, and we are committed to maintaining a professional environment free from harassment and misconduct. It was corporate language that managed to say everything and nothing simultaneously, carefully worded to avoid admitting any institutional failure while appearing to take the situation seriously. But Marcus, who maintained contacts inside the company through his investigative work, told me the internal situation was far more chaotic than the public statement suggested. The CEO was reportedly furious that this had blown up into a public scandal rather than being managed quietly through legal settlements and confidentiality agreements. The board of directors was demanding detailed answers about why multiple complaints had been filed and settled without anyone recognizing or addressing the clear pattern of behavior. 3 senior executives were facing serious questions about their roles in protecting Amelia despite documented concerns about why they had allowed her to move to a new company with glowing recommendations rather than addressing the underlying misconduct. The company was seriously considering hiring an external consulting firm to conduct a comprehensive review of their workplace culture, complaint procedures, and the mechanisms that had allowed this pattern to continue unchecked for so long. It was not perfect accountability, not the kind of immediate justice that would undo all the harm that had been done. But it was something. It was more than the silence and institutional complicity that had existed before the article forced the situation into public view. 2 weeks after the article published, I received one final message from Amelia. It came through an encrypted email service, the sender identity concealed behind layers of digital protection, but I knew immediately who had sent it. The subject line contained just 2 words, the same words she had used in her resignation email: "You won." The message itself was longer this time, angrier, lacking the careful corporate polish of her previous communication. "You destroyed my career, my professional reputation, my future in this industry. I hope you are satisfied with what you have accomplished. I hope it was worth making your private pain into public spectacle, worth exposing intimate details that should have remained between adults who made complicated choices. But know this, I am not the villain you have made me out to be. I am a woman who worked incredibly hard to succeed in a male-dominated industry, who competed and won against men who wanted to see me fail, who refused to apologize for my ambition or my success. You were simply too weak to keep your husband interested, and instead of accepting that reality, you destroyed me to make yourself feel better about your own failures. History will not remember you kindly." I read the message once, feeling that familiar cold clarity settle over me. Then I saved it to the folder Marcus was maintaining for potential future legal purposes. Then I composed a reply containing just 4 words. "Actions have consequences, Amelia." I never heard from her again after that exchange. I never forgot that final message from Amelia, never forgot her attempt to rewrite the entire narrative as though ambition justified cruelty and my refusal to stay silent represented weakness rather than strength. But I also never responded to it again. Never gave her the satisfaction of continued engagement or the opportunity to draw me into further justification of choices that required no justification. She had made her decisions over the course of years. I had made mine in response. The accounting was complete. The divorce proceedings moved forward with the mechanical efficiency of legal processes designed to dissolve partnerships that no longer functioned. Benjamin and I communicated exclusively through our lawyers for the most part, reducing our 7-year marriage to a series of financial calculations and asset divisions that could be negotiated and documented without requiring us to occupy the same space or engage in conversations that served no productive purpose. The finalization happened on a Tuesday in late spring, nearly 8 months after that text message had arrived at 2 in the morning and set everything in motion. Benjamin and I sat in a conference room at my lawyer's office, positioned on opposite sides of a long table with our respective legal representatives between us like buffers or perhaps referees. We signed papers that dissolved our marriage in less than an hour, each signature feeling both momentous and strangely anticlimactic, the end of something that had died months earlier finally being acknowledged in official documentation. The asset division was straightforward because neither of us had the energy or interest in fighting over possessions. The house sold quickly to a young couple expecting their first child, people who looked at the renovated kitchen and the carefully cultivated garden with the kind of optimism Benjamin and I had once felt about our future. We split the proceeds exactly down the middle. We divided retirement accounts and savings according to formulas our lawyers had negotiated. We separated our finances cleanly, each of us walking away with what we had contributed and nothing more. After the final papers were signed and witnessed, Benjamin asked if he could speak with me privately for just a moment. His lawyer looked uncomfortable with the request, probably concerned about what unscripted conversation might complicate, but I agreed. We stepped into the hallway outside the conference room, standing near the elevators in a space designed for exactly these kinds of awkward transitional moments. "Evelyn, I just want you to know that I am sorry," Benjamin said, his voice carrying that tone of practiced sincerity that I had learned to recognize as performance rather than genuine emotion. "For all of it. For everything that happened. I understand now what I lost, what I threw away because I was stupid and weak and let myself get manipulated." I looked at him and felt nothing but tired finality, the emotional equivalent of closing a book I had finished reading and setting it back on the shelf. "I am sure you are sorry, Benjamin. Sorry you got caught. Sorry there were consequences. Sorry your life got complicated and your professional reputation suffered. But I do not think you are actually sorry for betraying me, for making the choices that led to all of this. Because if you were genuinely sorry for the betrayal itself, you would have stopped yourself before it happened rather than after you got exposed." I turned toward the elevators without waiting for his response. "Goodbye, Benjamin. I hope you figure out whatever it is you need to figure out about yourself. But that is no longer my concern or my responsibility." I walked out of that conference room building and drove directly to the downtown loft I had purchased with my half of the house proceeds. The space was everything our shared house had not been. Entirely mine, filled with furniture and artwork I had selected without compromise or negotiation, organized according to my preferences and my schedule. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, clean modern lines that felt nothing like the craftsman details Benjamin and I had chosen together, and absolutely no memories of broken promises or failed partnerships. 6 months after the article about Amelia published, I received an unexpected email from Claire Patterson asking if I would be interested in meeting for coffee. She mentioned that Jessica and Sarah, the 2 women who had come forward from Amelia's current company, would also be joining if I was comfortable with that. I agreed immediately, curious about how their situations had evolved and grateful for the opportunity to connect with people who understood aspects of this experience that most of my other friends and colleagues could not fully grasp. We met at a small independent cafe near Claire's office on a Saturday afternoon. The 4 of us settled into a corner table with our drinks, and what I had anticipated might be an awkward or painful conversation instead became something surprisingly healing. We talked for nearly 3 hours, sharing updates about how our lives had changed in the months since everything had become public. Jessica's marriage had survived, though she was honest about how difficult the recovery process had been. She and her husband had committed to intensive counseling, to complete transparency about everything that had happened, to rebuilding trust through consistent action rather than empty promises. The work was ongoing and sometimes painful, but they had decided together that their relationship was worth fighting for despite the damage Amelia's manipulation had caused. Sarah had made different choices. She had left her position at the consulting firm and found a new job at a smaller company with more robust workplace policies and a culture that took harassment complaints seriously rather than burying them under legal settlements. She spoke about feeling safer in her professional environment, about not constantly looking over her shoulder wondering if someone in a position of authority might target her husband again. Claire had been promoted within her company and was now in a position to influence hiring practices and conduct standards. She talked about implementing changes to how complaints were handled, about creating systems that protected victims rather than prioritizing institutional reputation, about using her own experience to ensure other people would not have to suffer through similar situations in silence. "What you did, refusing to stay silent, refusing to accept that your private pain should protect Amelia's ability to continue hurting people, that gave the rest of us permission to speak up too," Claire said, looking directly at me with an intensity that made her words feel like both gratitude and testimony. "And that changed things. Not just for us individually, but for the broader conversation about accountability in professional settings." We exchanged contact information and made tentative plans to stay connected, to support each other, to continue advocating for better policies and stronger accountability in our respective professional spaces. Walking back to my car after that meeting, I felt something shift inside me. A recognition that what had started as my personal response to a cruel text message had evolved into something larger and more meaningful than I had initially imagined possible. My mother called one evening in early autumn, her voice carrying a weight I had never heard before. "I need to tell you something," she said without preamble. "I am dying, sweetheart. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months. Cancer that spread too far before we caught it, before I was willing to admit something was seriously wrong." I flew home the next morning, rearranging my work schedule and my life to spend as much time as possible with her during whatever time remained. Those 5 months were simultaneously the hardest and most precious of my life. I helped her through treatment appointments that made her sick and exhausted. I sat with her during long afternoons when she was too tired to do anything but rest. I held her hand during her final weeks when the pain medication kept her mostly unconscious, but occasionally she would surface and squeeze my fingers to let me know she was still present. She died on a Tuesday morning in February, peacefully in her sleep with Catherine and me sitting beside her bed. At her funeral, I told stories about her honesty, her wisdom, her final gift of acknowledging complex truths about her own marriage and validating my choice to make a different decision when faced with similar circumstances. 2 years after that text message had shattered my life at 2 a.m, I sat in my downtown loft watching the sun set over the city through those floor-to-ceiling windows I had chosen specifically because they let in maximum light. My new life was quieter than the one I had built with Benjamin. Simpler in some ways, more complicated in others. More honest throughout. I had joined the board of a non-profit organization that supported women leaving difficult relationships, using my architectural skills to help design safe housing facilities and my personal experience to understand what courage it required to walk away from situations that no longer served you. I had taken on challenging new consulting projects that pushed my professional abilities in directions I had not previously explored. I had rebuilt my relationship with Catherine into something stronger and more authentic than it had been before. I had made peace with my mother's memory and the complicated truths about her marriage that she had finally been willing to share. And sometimes, late at night when sleep proved elusive, I would remember that text message from Amelia. "He's mine now. He's occupied. Don't wait up." I would remember the cold clarity that had settled over me in that moment, the decision to respond with 7 words rather than paragraphs of pain, the choice to document and expose rather than suffer in silence. Amelia had thought she was announcing a victory, claiming territory, demonstrating power. Instead, she had handed me exactly the evidence I needed to dismantle her carefully constructed professional facade and expose a pattern of behavior she had been hiding for years. She had thought that text would break me, would reduce me to the role of devastated wife who would quietly disappear while she continued her pattern with new targets and new locations. Instead, it freed me. It freed me from a marriage that had been failing long before I was willing to admit it. It freed me from the version of myself who had been willing to ignore warning signs because confronting them felt too difficult. It freed me to build something new and honest and entirely my own. Because the truth is simpler than any revenge plot. People who treat others as disposable eventually discover they themselves are disposable, and women who refuse to accept cruelty at 2 a.m. sometimes become the architects of accountability that changes entire industries.